So welcome and so glad you're here. I had to miss the last two, but I watched them on Zoom, which is why I'm getting people in the front row and trying to improve the microphone, because I know it was very hard to hear people in the room when we use the microphone from the machine, from the computer itself. Anyway, this is the third in our series of classes on identity. And after Kelly's introduction, we're trying to have each week focused on our identity as individuals and as a church in relationship to people who may or may not be different from us. So last week she was talking about pronouns and LGBTQ people. We're going to have a class on race, people of different races. We're going to have a class on religions, people of different religions. And today we're going to talk about immigration status and people, native-born people versus immigrants, and how we see ourselves and how we see our community, which, as you know, is changing a lot, has changed a lot over the years since I moved here in 1990. It's changed quite a bit. So I was going to start with a pop quiz, which basically means things I had to look up because I didn't know the answers to. And you might not know the answers to either, but if you look at the prizes, the prizes are a big smile. Okay, so the population of Bellevue, city of Bellevue, roughly, what would you say? Yes.
169.
Very close. It's the latest estimate I got was 155,000. So that's right on the mark. So there are about 155,000 people in Bellevue, living in Bellevue. And by comparison, just out of interest, the population of Seattle, the city of Seattle, does anybody? Seattle City, not the metro. 750. So you got the right general ballpark, right? So we're only, Bellevue itself is only about 1/5. Of course, there's the greater east side, which is bigger, but it's about 1/5 of the population of Seattle City. And okay, the percent of Bellevue residents who identify as minority populations, that is people who do not, the majority supposedly is white, non-Hispanic. So anybody who considers themselves not that. What would you guess?
60, I was going to say.
You guys are amazing. It's 58.5, which is pretty close to 60. 60%, 58% of the people who live in Bellevue consider themselves minority or would be classified under the US system as minority. And by comparison, so that's 58% in Bellevue. What would you guess for Seattle?
64%.
44% or something.
Okay, it's actually 39%. So the city of Seattle is less diverse. It's much bigger, but less diverse than the city of Bellevue. So Bellevue has so the percentage of Bellevue residents who are minority, 60% versus 30, basically 40%. And okay, so this is a slightly different question. The percentage of Bellevue residents not born in the US. So this is not a racial characteristic. This is whether or not they were born in the US.
35.
30, we have a 32, we have a 35. So we know that 58% are minority. It's actually 43%. 43% of the residents come in, of the city of Bellevue were not born in the US. I'd say that included my husband, but he doesn't live in Bellevue. But it does include you, right? You live in Bellevue, right? Yeah. Okay.
Not born in the
Right, and not born in the US. So, and in Seattle, that's only 20%. So 43% of the people who live in Bellevue are immigrants, and only 20% of the people in Seattle are. So I thought those were kind of interesting.
Lori,
Yes,
I think it's at least that in Redmond.
about the same in Redmond.
At least that in the condo association where I live, it's almost 50%.
Wow, okay. I didn't check Redmond or Kirkland, even though I live in Kirkland. I didn't check that. But
With Microsoft,
Yes. Microsoft is a mini United Nations. It is amazing, the different number of people from all over in every country all over the world. It's incredible. So, and then, so the percent of Bellevue, we've got that. So 43% not born in the US, 58% minority population. So percentage of Bellevue residents who speak a language other than English at home. It's 50%. So 58% are consider themselves a minority, and 50% can speak a language other than English at home or do. And versus only 21% in Seattle. So in this Bellevue City schools, about 42% of the children speak a language other than English at home. So that has really changed a lot of things about the way classes are conducted and in school. Doesn't mean they're not fluent in English. It just means they do also speak another language at home. And this one blew me away. The number of languages spoken by students at home, Bellevue City students at home, 103.
Oh, wow.
I didn't think anybody would get that because the last I checked, it was a lot lower. I think maybe they're starting to include a lot of dialects and such, but still 103 languages spoken at home. So this makes it complicated. And okay, so here, this is easier. One, top foreign languages spoken in Bellevue. What foreign languages?
Which one?
Yeah, the question, which foreign languages are the top ones? Chinese, Mandarin, Spanish,
Russian.
Hindi. Hindi is one,
Yeah.
And-
Urdu.
Korean.
Mhm.
Too. So, I mean, the list goes on and on and on, but those are the top ones. So I'm curious, just as a point of discussion. Okay, so actually, in terms of the percentage of Bellevue residents not born in the US, 43% now. In the year 2000, it was 13%. So it was 13% at that point, and now it's 43%. So how has that changed your perception of Bellevue of our identity as the community of Bellevue? Just curious.
We don't reflect Bellevue as a whole.
Right, our church community doesn't reflect Bellevue as a whole. Less than us, yeah. It may have in 1990 or 2000,
Yeah, but now it's not.
but now it doesn't.
Yes.
I would say, because I've only lived in Bellevue since 1984. Is it 1984?
Only since
No,
84.
86, actually 86. But my husband grew up in Bellevue, went all through the schools. But for me, and then, we live in the Somerset area.
Mm.
When Joey was little and, we had birthday parties and all kinds of things, he was always the minority at the birthday parties.
Oh, really?
He had it, his home in it.
Somerset school kids.
Betting things,
Yeah.
same thing with their kids.
I remember when Emily was at Newport High School. So this would have been late 1990s, early 2000s.
No, early.
Well, yeah. Yeah, she graduated. Well, anyway.
In 2005.
So there were a lot of Asians at Newport then, and there were a lot of mixed blood kids like her, and she found them, or they found her, and she had quite a community there. Got a lot of different, because she's both Caucasian and Chinese, and she found people who were mixed just like her, and so but so since 1990. I mean, but how does that affect the way we look even out at our community? Yes.
One thing is, it strikes me, so I grew up in a community that was 50% Hispanic. So, I was used to, but the 50% was either kids from Spain or kids from Mexico. And those two communities didn't interact. So we had kind of three communities in my small farming community where I grew up. What really strikes me is that kind of everyone is a stranger here, not a stranger, but it's that you have to reach out to other communities. There's not one kind of main community, and that it's an opportunity to build connections between all the diverse, like commonalities between all the diverse.
Opportunity.
And yes, one of the things I noticed is just, being in other families' homes, so Joey's good friends, is the way we thought about raising our kids was the same. And even if a different language was being spoken, sometimes to either correct the kid, or to show some kind of affection because of the inflection, you could tell what was being said. I mean, it was just really interesting, but the parenting kind of practices were just awesome.
Did other people find that true as well?
I think that would be true because they're in the same socioeconomic group too. I think you might see differences if you were in other ones.
I remember having a long discussion with a Chinese immigrant friend of mine in the summit in Bellevue when my daughter was young. And she was saying how a lot of, she was reacting against the Chinese style of education, which is very rigid, and wanting her kids to have a more open discussion, less rigid style of, and I was the opposite. I was like, none of that loosey-goosey stuff. I want her to learn to read and write. And of course, I had just gotten back from 8 years in Hong Kong, maybe. But that there was that it was interesting that she had those values about education and saw that a difference in values from what she had had when she was a child. Yes.
It was interesting in our neighborhood because our oldest graduated from high school in '86 from Newport. So that was a little before
Right.
this rush. But in the neighborhood, there was an Asian family, and the kids always acknowledged the fact that they were out playing, but the Asian kids, you could see them in their bedroom, and they were studying.
They were studying. They weren't allowed to play out at night if their homework wasn't done. Yes, Mary.
In the nineties and early 2000s, when I was still gainfully employed, at the hospital where I was in Edmonds, which is generally a lower income area, number one. But we reached our hospitals covered a lot of rural area too. But what was amazing is that the young couples that came in with newborns were frequently multiracial.
Oh.
They were not, one was, girl was one and the guy was the other. And all 20 years ago.
Yeah, so biracial people are becoming more and more
Very
common.
common.
And Emily could find quite a few friends that were
Yeah.
biracial,
Yeah.
like herself. Okay, so and so I think one of the things that I want to get to at some point is to talk about how we bridge any differences that we do feel with new Asian neighbors. But first I wanted to ask all of you in the room, how many of you are not native-born Americans? We have two. We have Lynn, who was born in, and Jean, who was born in China, right? Okay. So, so I'm curious about the rest of us. How many have any immigrant ancestors? And, did they have papers when they came? Did they have immigration papers? Right? Were they legal immigrants or were they undocumented immigrants?
Ellis Island.
Ellis Island, right? Right. Okay. So I did some research on that as well. So a little bit about the history, and let's see if I can get this picture up so that others can see it. Share this. So I think that, yeah, the people can see it there too. So this is just a little bit of history, very rough. The gray portion is the percentage of the US population that is an immigrant, so foreign born. Back in 1850, it was about 10%. And then it went up to a peak of about 14.8% in 1890, early 1900s. And then it fell very drastically down into 1970. It's only about 5%. And then, as you can see, it's gone up a great deal since 1970 to 13.8% today. Well, this was, I guess, 2 years ago. So around 13.8%. And that is actually a little bit below the peak. This is not the highest percentage, but it's close. It's gone way up since then. So, pardon? Oh, somebody's saying something.
Gloria.
Oh, Gloria, would you like to say something?
My network is skipping. That's why I'm raising
Oh,
my
it's your
hand.
network. Okay. Oh, it's your network beeping. Okay. Maybe you could mute until you're ready to talk. But
All right.
anyway, so it turns out that in answer to the earlier question, it was really 1882 when the federal government took over immigration. It started keeping track of immigration and being at all the entry points. Before that, it was by city and state. It was kind of random. They didn't really keep track of how many people were coming in because so many people were coming in. And it was in 1882. And as you can see, it was close to the peak. So what happens, the pattern in US history is as the percentage of immigrants in the population goes up, the sense of nervousness among the rest of the population, the US born part of the population goes up as well. And then there's a bunch of legislation. So in 1882, there was something called the Immigration Act, which actually imposed a head tax on every immigrant of 50 cents. You had to pay 50 cents when you came in. Now, I assume 50 cents was a lot more in those days than it is now. It's hard to imagine they'd even have a law mentioning cents. And also they would this law said that if you came into the US, they were going to limit the number of people who were criminals or lunatics or who could not support themselves. That was the first limitation on immigration in that first act, that they could go to the border and well, really the ports of entry. It was all by sea. And go on the ship. And if there was anybody who was sick or criminal or a lunatic, they could put them on the ship and force them to go back. But the very same year, 1882, there was another law passed, and it was called the Chinese Exclusion Act. And it was the very first time there was ever any law in the United States that excluded people from any given country. And it actually excluded laborers from China, not all Chinese, but Chinese who were laborers. And as you probably remember, a lot of Chinese helped to build the railroad, the Transcontinental Railroad. And one thing I realized later about this is the Chinese built the western part, and the other part going up to Utah was built by Irish immigrants. So there were immigrants building both sides, but the law was passed to exclude laborers from China. And you probably know more. I think they do teach this in the schools now. They didn't when I was growing up, but they do now. So it's really in 1882. And then in 1920s, they passed another law which decided the number of immigrants that could come in from any given country. And it was called national origins, based on the percentage of the population that was already in the US. So if you were Scottish or Irish or even Italian, it was much easier to get into the country. And then the Polish and Eastern Europeans, there were more limits on that. And then Chinese laborers, it was zero. But in other countries, so like Japanese or Indian or whatever, there weren't many coming in, but there weren't many in the population either. So they had that national origins. And you can see how that affected the percentage of immigrants. It went way down after those laws took effect. And then, so what happened in 1965? Does anybody know? There was another another Immigration Act passed under Lyndon Johnson, Civil Rights Act. So we remember the Civil Rights Act, but a lot of people, I'm sure you know about the Immigration Act in 1965. What it did was it lifted all those, it just abolished all those categories of national origin. So they no longer had quotas for different countries. And so since then, first of all, the number of immigrants has increased, but also the number of increased immigrants from Asia, from Latin America, from Africa, from all different parts of the world other than Europe have increased dramatically. And that's, yes.
I just have a question, going back to the exclusion of the Chinese immigrants. Why were the Chinese? excluded and not
My understanding is that there was a fear that they were taking jobs away from US born or European immigrants who, it was a labor related thing. There was fear that they were taking jobs away. I mean, as if there were not enough jobs back in the time. It's hard to imagine, but
They're saying.
yeah, there are a lot of jobs now, right?
Yeah, and people needing to hire and there aren't enough to hire all the time,
Mhm.
but we can't let them in.
Right, taking jobs away, and there's actually shortages in certain areas, both skilled and unskilled, which I think is very, I used to think, oh, why don't we make it easier for skilled laborers to come in? But we need unskilled laborers too. So anyway, I thought those numbers were interesting. So what kind of worries do you think either you have or other people's have about this? So as you can see from history, that's the time when whenever the number gets up high like that, then it's kind of a pattern in the US that there would be a lot of people that are nervous about immigration and nervous about jobs being taken away, et cetera. But what have you noticed, or what comments would you have?
It takes anybody's jobs away, but now how they process them, they're left in these places for years. And it's like you either decide they come in or they don't, like, why is the process so slow and sluggish? And it looks like they haven't changed anything, have they? What's the latest law that we have on immigration?
George W. Bush tried to pass one
I
and
know.
failed.
And then they tried to pass a bipartisan one and it failed. So no one's really, it's just this political thing where they want to blame the other candidate for not doing something about immigration. And then Congress never passes anything. So, but I think the people that come in shouldn't be sitting in these. It's like a prison, isn't it?
They're sitting in prison, or they're left,
Yeah.
even after they're let out, they're in limbo for a long,
Yeah,
long,
the
long, long
process
time.
is right.
Woody?
Coming from a farm background, I'm
Yes.
concerned about farm labor.
Yeah, they need those really bad.
They're just very important. I mean, there's quite middle class people that want to work on the farm.
Mhm.
They don't want to do picking and dirty jobs there.
Yeah, Woody's right. I mean, Florida's having a problem with it right now. I understand a lot of oranges aren't getting picked
Mhm.
because they passed some law there or something about the immigrants, and now they have nobody working the fields.
Yeah.
Right? So.
I think we also have to just think about racism. I also grew up in a farming community and, the code name was green hornets because I worked, as a teenager, I was working fruit. And over the intercom, green hornets are coming, and that meant the immigration was doing the sweep. And so
Oh.
they'd arrive and there'd be 4 white teenage kids with just this massive operation. But they came through and they would just, pick up anybody, and they happened to pick up Rudy Rodriguez, who was a high school teacher who didn't have his wallet on him.
Oh my
And so in jail for like a week, and that was it. They stationed the police at the edges of our town, and immigration was not allowed to come in.
Oh, interesting.
So, but the racism, you have to, I mean,
Yeah.
I wish I'm sorry to be political, but I wish Kamala Harris would just say, because people are brown, they're not evil. And there's so much racism associated. You mentioned the Irish. I mean, the Irish really struggled. My husband's
grandmother was Irish, and she kind of snuck in the 1920s because even that 1920s law, they were looking at the Irish. They didn't have many
That's right.
Irish in the United States, and they wanted to keep the Irish out.
Yeah,
that's
true.
So the racism.
It's true, it is, with the Italian, the big rush of Italians, immigrants, same thing.
I remember even when I was a kid, there was a town near us that had a lot of, Italian immigrants in it that were working in the steel factories. And the Anglo and the had this real people there had a very strong prejudice against the Italians. And that was in my childhood, so
Well,
not that
even
long
in
ago.
our timber industry, you know, the Scandinavians, they
Came
fought with each other.
They were all immigrants.
And they were all immigrants, and then the Greeks, if they had, you know, they were the scum of the earth, if you hired a Greek person. You know, so, so everybody always has to be on top, and that's so sad.
The latest immigrants are the ones that get attacked, right?
Yeah. Well, right now it's Hispanic mostly.
Yeah.
Although it's interesting that coming across the border, well, another big thing, I want to get to that, but another big change that's happened is that when all these laws were passed, as I said before, almost 100% of the people, the immigrants came by sea. And when a ship came, you could stop the ship and go on and count all the people, process them and then let them off. And with airplanes too, some people, my husband came by airplane, they could stop and ask you questions and such. But with the southern border, I mean, the southern border has been there a long time, but I guess, I don't know the history of it, of why there weren't so many people coming over it before. They probably were a lot, but they went back and forth, I imagine, because it was fairly easy. And Mexicans would come and work in our fields, and then they'd go home and have better food and family back home. And now they can't go home and have Christmas with their
I
family.
grew up in a farming, that's what they were doing. That time, they were busting them
After
in.
harvest,
After harvest, they went back.
went back
Bust
to
them in.
Mexico.
Yeah, because they
Yeah.
did the asparagus and the other stuff, So it is very confusing because I thought that, they came in. went back.
And there was a system of work permits, and they've kind of gotten rid of that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I also grew up in that agricultural area in Southern California, very near the Mexican border. And there was what's called the Bracero program
Oh, right.
for many years, which was farm labor. But that area, my high school is 55-60% Mexican American. So
Oh, it's a-
where I went to high school, I was probably the African American were the minority. Well, there were some Asian, some Hindu, African American whites, and then the majority were Hispanic.
Where was your hometown?
It's called Raleigh, California.
California.
Near El Centro, it's in the Imperial Belt,
Mm-hmm.
27 miles from the Mexican border.
Okay. So actually you were in a minority
Minority.
growing up.
Mhm.
Mhm.
The affluent minority, but
Yeah.
the one
Exactly.
for me, of course,
Yeah.
the land, I did, or my family.
So, but in terms of any kind of worries that either you have or that your neighbors have about the changing nature of Bellevue, what have you heard about worries, things people are worried about? Is anybody worried?
Well, we live in a very diverse neighborhood by
Mhm.
choice in Renton.
Mhm.
And I guess my one worry is I don't want to offend anyone, and I know there are cultural differences and sometimes different values. I mean, we all get along great, everyone's very nice, but I always worry that because we also have a son who lives in Japan, and I'm very aware, like just from having visited him multiple times, that although everyone's very cordial on the surface, those values run deep, and it is easy to be well-meaning and yet still do something that's not necessarily culturally correct or acceptable to another culture without meaning to. And so I'm very, I guess, that's my one fear is that I don't want to blunder or do something offensive.
Yeah,
without
we don't know
meaning
what we
to.
don't know, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
You don't know what you, because, and especially if there are a lot of people from different countries. You might come to know one country or people from one country in that
Mhm.
culture, but there are
Then
others
you have to learn.
that might take offense at something and without knowing. What about, yeah, Chrissy?
I was volunteering with a booth for this other organization I volunteer for, at a cultural thing, Welcome Week in Issaquah, where they were celebrating different cultures. And so they had people doing a dragon dance and, all these different events. And one of the women I was with is from India. And she was busy texting her daughter when they were doing the things that were from India about how she found them inappropriate and not okay. And they were people she knew, they were perpetuating things. She said, that isn't really how we do those. Anyway, so even within a culture, you can offend, I guess, what I want to say.
Oh,
And me, I have no idea. I'm just going, oh, that's beautiful.
And she didn't. Yeah, I lived in Hong Kong for 8 years. I never saw a dragon dance.
Yes, yeah, yeah.
And maybe there were some, but
Okay.
nobody talked about them or anything, but it's kind of classic here.
Well, I think one of the big fears is deportation, because, I'm a product of probably the peak on that, from the Ashkenazis.
Mm.
I did not know I was Ashkenazi.
Wow.
My grandfather, escaped, Europe, World War I, because he saw the writing on the wall.
Mhm.
Our family would not be here.
From Germany or
Poland.
Poland? Okay.
He was Jewish. I should be a Persky, I found out. And we did not know that until 23andMe came. They buried it.
So he hid his
He
identity.
married a Danish woman, so he could get over to this country
Oh,
as a Dane, and they took her name. Married and came over. But my fear is not for myself. It's for people that are immigrating and they're being deported to an unknown situation. And I know what happened 100 years ago in Europe. We all know now. And it's not the same thing in Venezuela or Colombia.
but persecution is persecution.
But what is the same is if we deport these people, they are getting killed in their home countries, just as if my grandfather would have been sent back to Poland, he would have gone to a camp.
For sure. And there was
Yes,
no
there's
bill.
no doubt. And we didn't know this until
Wow.
10 years ago.
Was this your grandpa Iverson? Is that
No,
the name they took?
Grandpa Persky.
No.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's
And so
amazing
that's my
story.
fear is the deportation policy. We're sending these people unknowns, just as it was in 1920.
Mhm.
And that's when that peak was that you showed. It was
Right.
1920.
Mhm.
I was just gonna say on a different track, going by the bus stops for the school kids, we picked up,
Yes.
notice a great deal of Asian and very few white. Now that's showing prejudice, but that is an issue. But it's not like it's just all integrating, everything's one, everything's fine.
Mm.
You do see a difference.
So this is Somerset. So Somerset Elementary is probably could be majority Asian.
Yeah, so.
I think Newport High School is majority Asian, just over 50%. And so Somerset would be even more so, yeah.
The school bus that gets off by our condo, all of the children are from India.
India.
They're all brown. There's nothing, if there's one white kid, it really stands out. Because they're beautiful black hair and everything, and then, and the parents are right there caring for them, of course, they're great parents, but it's like. So it's the condo areas in Redmond, and of course, many new apartment buildings are accommodating all of the tech folk. And I think they work for less than the US people. And I think they, and possibly even brighter, you never know. Anyway, they more and more
Raise your hand.
Or skill.
Yeah.
But it's hard to get. It's not, I mean, a lot of the foreign students come over and study, and many of them study tech, and even they have, the only way they can stay after graduation is if they have a job that where the company will apply for this status for them. You can't go apply it for yourself, but if the company sponsor that, and the company has to say that they couldn't find an American for this job, a US born American.
Sharon's trying to talk.
Oh, Sharon, please.
Yes, we've lived in West Bellevue for over 50 years in the same house, and we've seen a dramatic change in our neighborhood. When we've had a block party for the last 4 years on our street, and nearly all the people that I talk to that are Asian are very, very interested in the international school they have in Bellevue. They are much more interested in that than Bellevue High School, which when our kids were going to school, Bellevue High was just the best school in all this world. But who knows anything about the international school?
Not enough to.
I don't know too much about it. I do know that when my daughter was young, they did have, it was already up and running, and it's and they just have a much more international education. It's not the International Baccalaureate though, right? That's the Sammamish. But yeah, I don't know. That's interesting. We should find out more about that. I don't know how many Bellevue residents we even have here. Yes.
Okay, great. Attended. For your
Yes, Woody.
Well, two things. When my kids, this is in the 70s, my kids were young. It was the issue of blacks moving to the east side.
Oh, really?
And David Meekoff definitely wanted to move, live in Newport Hills, so he could help that. And there was one family in Newport Hills, the Brooks family, was very popular, very, very talented, and there were school teachers that lived there, and they kind of led the way. But I mean, when my kids were in school, it was the black kids were the athletes, good athletes, and they were friends, and there was no problem with the kids at all. It was fine. But the other thing I was going to say, knowing a lot of people in Newport Hills, some of them that have small kids are concerned that the Asian people thing or something. I don't know anything about it, but that's one of the complaints.
I've heard that for Newport High School, and I think it tends to be a language thing. So it's the new immigrants who have just come over, and the parents were not educated in English or in American schools, so they feel uncomfortable with the language, and also with, how would you say, you might know better. What would you guess? They're
really
thinking.
don't know
Mhm.
about the
Parents today.
but many of them don't.
Asian immersion school.
Yes, Chinese.
Elementary is just Newport Elementary.
Newport Hills,
Yeah.
yeah, which is great. And they take kids from all backgrounds,
Right, yeah.
and the language of instruction is Mandarin, which is very cool. I wish my daughter lived close enough.
Chinese immersion moved out of Newport Hills.
Oh, it left Newport Hills?
Yeah.
Where is it now?
It's a bigger place. I really don't know. It's somewhere in Bellevue.
Oh.
I didn't know that.
Oh, this is.
Oh, Jean.
I was gonna say, in late 1960s, my daughter was in Hazelwood School, which borderlines Bellevue and Renton. She was the only Chinese. One day she came home and she said, I don't want to be this color.
No.
You know.
Yeah.
And now in Newport High School, where my husband was tutoring, he said,
the hallway, it's all black
Black?
hair,
Black hair.
all black hair.
Asians of
Yeah.
different.
It has its good and bad.
So you think that the bad being that with Asians in a majority, that's a different experience for everyone at the school.
And I find, like you said earlier, when my kids were in elementary school, I didn't think their education was enough.
Strict enough.
They spent the first 3 months reviewing what they lost during the summer, and you can go, I went and complained to the teacher, and I kept my kids up with all the
date.
workbooks during the summer, so that their minds are still doing arithmetic and all that.
Today they would call you a tiger mom.
Yeah.
They didn't use that word then.
They are saying it now, though.
Yeah, I was a tiger mom.
My daughter accused me of being a tiger
Yes.
mom. I said,
And no overnights in our cul-de-sac in Newport Hills. It was just wonderful. We weren't discriminated. We're all young families. The kids all play. We watch each other's kids. But I said no overnight. That's one thing. So
I'm gonna, you've had a couple of things. I was gonna just add a few more points, but.
My house cleaners that I've had for several years are from Brazil,
Mm.
and very few of them speak English. And I'm trying to make myself learn how to use the translate thing on my phone, and I never get it right. But one of them will have a few words, and it's always couples, all for this one company, but there are many.
And their kids are gonna be totally fluent, right? I mean, that's just the way it kind of.
On the same note, we have a Korean family in our neighborhood, and one of my neighbors is a very, she's not afraid to go and talk to people, and so she used to walk with me, but they walk later now. So she got this young Korean woman to walk with them when they go walking at least a couple days a week when her kids are in school. Too.
Oh, nice.
Anyway, so those are
That's a
things
good
we
way to
can
do it. Yeah.
Yeah.
I just wanted, because we don't have that much time, Nancy brought up a point before the class we were talking about, and she was talking about anti-Asian hate. So I think we all remember during the pandemic, there were all these talks about the Chinese disease and then there were attacks on Asian people who looked like they might be Chinese. A lot of them weren't, that were attacked on the streets. There were some that were killed. And there was a really big surge of fear. My husband even said at one point, I think I'll buy a gun. And I said, we are not having a gun in our house. So no, that's not happening. But I mean, he was concerned and went out and got pepper spray. I mean, because that was a very scary thing. And so we haven't heard about it lately, right? So I looked up a little bit of background, and there have been more recently some surveys of Asian Americans. And one of them was done just this year. It came out in March. About half of the Asian American Pacific Islander adults that were asked in the survey experienced an act of hate in 2023 due to their race, ethnicity, or nationality. Half, 49%. This was last year. Most hate acts involved harassment, 88%, and 23% involved physical contact or harm. That was last year. So then this year, I didn't realize this. Maybe some of you knew that after the Trump assassination, the New York Post ran an erroneous article saying that the shooter was a Chinese man. And apparently there was all kinds of reaction on all kinds of misinformation going out on social media because they had just declared that as a fact. And it just set off a storm of misinformation and racist content, et cetera. Later, the New York Post said, oh, we made a mistake. But by then, all of this had gone out. So this was in July. And then this past Wednesday, there's an organization called the Committee of 100, and it's a group of Chinese Americans, specifically kind of very prominent people throughout the country. And they did a survey, and they found out that 2/3 of Chinese Americans, 68%, stated that they face at least one form of discrimination in an average month. My husband was shocked because he doesn't, but he's not in the workforce. He said, that's not true for me. But this was a national survey. 2/3 of Chinese Americans feel like they face one form of discrimination or not. And 61% say that the language and rhetoric used by the US news media when reporting on US-China relations, they're not talking about misinformation. They're talking about what is said about China and US China threat, China war, China, that language that they're reading in the US news media or hearing has directly affected how strangers treat them. 61% said they felt that because of these reports, these really negative reports about China itself, that they have felt some kind of negative effect. And that's today. So it's not the wave of fear we had at that time, but it's still ongoing. And maybe people say things in a survey that they don't talk about with their friends necessarily. Why would you? But what do you do? Somebody says something awful. There was one that was example, a woman who stopped. There was a multiracial Pacific Islander in New York. And a woman stopped him in the street and screamed in his face, "You're wearing a mask. What goes around comes around. Go back to effing China." And this guy was on his way home from picking up a prescription. Well, he was Pacific Islander, so he may have looked a little Asian to this person. And then another example was, and this is an Indian man in California, from India. Someone yelled and spat at me from a balcony and told me to go back to India. And he made gunshot signs at me with his hands. So this kind of thing is still happening. It's kind of
Racism's never stopped.
well, and then all this
You know?
negative talk about China is affecting people. They're saying, "Oh, well, China's the enemy. China, they're bad guys over there. We don't like those people." And I mean, that's not what the media is saying, but that's the conclusion that people are drawing from that.
Well, and we have seen, most recently how the lies about Haitian immigrants.
That was
And the
terrible.
admitted lies
Yeah.
have created havoc in the community, for the
Yes.
entire community, the Haitian population, and all the schools they had to shut down.
Because they had
there were
threats.
30 bomb threats. They had to have the National Guard come in to keep people safe.
And then there's talk about the Congolese and Venezuelans emptying out their jails and sending people to the US, sending criminals to the US. And there's no fact behind
It's not
that.
true
The
either.
media has looked into that and they can't prove it anyway. It's kind of hard to know what's going on in Venezuela, but they don't see that's the case. But Venezuelans and the Congolese are probably feeling pretty uncomfortable right now. Yes.
I'm gonna link us back to the survey for a second. It's
Okay.
something that really struck me. And it's that change doesn't come through fear, it
Mm.
comes through joy.
Mm.
So those in this room facing this horrible thing where people are being discriminated against, or we have to find the joyful, I'll share that, I grew up in a community that's half Hispanic. I loved going to my Hispanic friends' homes because the moms fed you nonstop. You could starve to death in a lost household. It's celebrate the joys of diversity, and the rest. Conversation is getting scarier and scarier in this room. For us to find a way to celebrate joy and celebrate, because diversity is lovely. It's a way for us to expand our universe and touch God, to be perfectly honest.
Yeah.
I'm glad you're bringing it back bringing it back around before we leave. The other thing is we don't have too much time for this, is get to some quotes from the Bible. Genesis, I am a foreigner and a stranger among you. Sell me some property for burial site here so I can bury my dead. This is Abraham, who was then allowed to do that. Job, I was eyes to the blind and feet to the lame. I was father to the needy. I took up the case of the stranger. I broke the fangs of the wicked and snatched victims from their teeth. Leviticus, the foreigner residing among you must be treated as your native born. Love them as yourself, for you were foreigners in Egypt. I am the Lord your God. And in the New Testament as well, we get, for I was hungry and you gave me something to eat. I was thirsty and you gave me something to drink. I was a stranger and you invited me in. In Colossians, in that renewal, there is no longer Greek nor Jew, circumcised or uncircumcised, barbarian, Scythian, slave, and free, but Christ is all in all. And then Hebrews, do not forget to show hospitalities to strangers, for by doing so, some people have shown hospitality to angels without knowing it. Yeah.
So maybe we have a task for the week.
So,
It's somewhat.
yes.
Yeah.
So how do we bring us back to joy? What are some ideas of yours? Oops, there's Karen.
We all reach out to someone this week,
Other than my
whatever we're
husband.
doing. You know, I liked your story, Chris, about how the neighbor invited
Someone to walk.
someone to walk and then have that relationship. Just take that step to do that.
Mhm.
I think even just saying hello, even just when we're walking, that a lot of times immigrants heads are down and, just saying hello and trying to be a friendly face.
Yeah. Lynn.
Some years ago, we had a prayer that brings to mind the idea of joy. It's, oh God of joy, help us to be a community where the lame dance and where even those who were outcast everywhere else break bread with us and share your joy.
Wow.
I just love
That is
That's a
perfect.
really good one. That's a good one.
That's
Sharon.
yes, Sharon. How do we bring joy. You're muted.
Joy has become a favorite word of mine. I find myself when I'm in the stores, I always is right, is I always say, find some joy in your life today. And I think my children get sick and tired of hearing me say that, because I just say that to everybody, and they respond to that very favorably. So find a little joy in our life every day.
That's great. And to say it. Yeah. What else? Other ideas for spreading joy? Smile. Yeah, I live not far from the Juanita Beach Park, and talk about a mini United Nations. I try to listen for different languages, and there are a lot of them I just have no idea what they are. I can tell like a Slavic language is Russian or something like that. I can tell some things, but there are other languages I just have no idea. And there are a number of women with burqas there. And I think it comes from the Muslims that we've had visiting here at our church. I just look them right in the eye and smile at them. I don't look at what's on their head. I just look at their eyes.
And we have an opportunity right in our midst with Milan from Slovakia.
Yes.
He was there and worship every day. He likes it if you do the translation with your phone, because he doesn't know much English, which is amazing to me that he sits and listens.
I didn't
We
realize that.
don't always.
I didn't know he didn't.
He smiles.
And he has a minimum amount of English.
Oh, he is.
Oh, okay.
That's too bad. But he came here. Is he Christian at home? I mean, is he have a similar? It must have
Must be. Yeah.
been some reason he came to this church.
He's with John.
Oh, he's with John White. Okay, all right. Good. I get.
But
Oh, that's right. He mentioned that. He said he was going to come into the class, but he had to go with him.
he's very friendly and loves to talk with you.
Great. And not being afraid to make a mistake, just you might.
Karen's hand, though.
Yes, Karen, we haven't heard from you.
Well, you can show joy in your handshake. When you have a handshake with somebody, you can hand with love, or you can just it can be kind of a sterile type of a thing that you really don't mean it, or it's just expected. But a handshake can be a way of showing love and joy and, just acceptance and pleased with the person that you're talking with, or, you're communicating with. It's good.
Gloria, I'm curious what your reaction to this has been. We're talking about American society and American history and American attitudes. So if you have any reaction, just let us know. You're still muted. Oh, okay, you're muted.
Okay, I'm okay now.
Yes.
It's I think the starting point for showing joy is for one to be joyful in their heart. You can, personally, I believe you cannot offer what you don't have.
That's right.
So once your heart is full of joy, full of gratitude, full of love, it's easy to look at everyone and infect them with your love, with your joy, with your gratitude. So for us, when I say us, I mean Presbyterian Bellevue, because I've become a member. Yes, so for us is to have a starting point of having love, having joy, being thankful to God for the opportunity that everyone is craving for. The government is blocking an influx of immigrants because they think the United States is a dream state for everyone. So if people who are in the United States have love, joy, and gratitude, then they will infect it to others. Indeed, the love for coming there will increase.
That's
Personally, my surname is Kukunda, and Kukunda means love.
Oh, that's nice. Yeah,
It starts with you, you give it to others.
That sounds like a perfect benediction and way to end the class with love and joy and an open heart. So we'll try it.